So there I was, dead. Killed in action by a top-tier operator at the peak of my career. That operator being a peanut. I had a nut allergy and a bad habit of not reading labels, and somewhere out there a granola bar is getting a medal. 15 years, the best cleaner in the business. 41 jobs, 0 misses, never once on camera. I killed with information as often as a blade. And I go out face down next to a smoothie. Real dignified. 10 out of 10, would not recommend. I figured that was the end. Lights out, roll credits, collect my complimentary afterlife. Instead, I woke up 17 years old, wearing somebody else's scrawny body, face down in the dirt of a training yard, with a very large man screaming into my face. Classic Tuesday. The large man screaming is Lord Dorian Vale, and as his words sink in, my new brain helpfully loads up the situation, buffering like the world's worst connection. In this world, every well-bred 16-year-old goes through the rite of marking, where the gods stamp a sigil, a magic brand, onto your hand. Fire, storm, steel, whatever. That sigil is your power, your rank, your entire worth. The kid whose body I'm renting, Dorian Vale, third son of a fallen house, went through the rite 3 days ago in front of the whole court. And he got absolutely nothing. A blank hand. A blank. The first noble blank in 200 years. So Lord Vale's speech boils down to this. You have shamed this house, you're disowned at sundown, and you're being shipped to the Ashen Wall, the frontier fort where they send garbage to become slightly further away garbage. The old Dorian would have cried. I can feel the kid's memories in here. 16 years of being the family embarrassment, flinching every time a door opened. Genuinely sad stuff. But the old Dorian isn't driving anymore. I stood up, brushed off the dirt, and did the first thing I do on every job. I read the room, and the room was fascinating. Everybody here treats these sigils like miracles. To me, they look like weapons. Weapons with manuals. That knight with the steel sigil reinforced his skin. Impressive. Except he was holding his breath to do it. 40 seconds, tops, before his own armor starts suffocating him. The court mage with the flame brand kept his casting hand a half step forward, telegraphing every strike like an amateur. And the Lord's personal guard was babying a bad left knee so carefully he might as well have hung a sign on it. Every single person in this room was overpowered and utterly beautifully predictable. A career's worth of tells, and not one of them had ever met somebody who counts tells for a living. I spent one life as the deadliest man in a world of guns. And the universe, in its infinite comedy, dropped me into a world where nobody's ever heard of a gun, and handed me the manual to everyone's superpowers on the way in. Okay, universe. I'm listening. There were 2 people in that yard the court didn't care about, standing in the reject section with me. And both of them were lying about who they were. The first was Wren, a servant, assigned to escort me to the wall. Mousy, forgettable, doing her best to be furniture. Except furniture doesn't stand ready to move. Furniture doesn't track every exit without turning its head. That's not a maid. That's training. Noted. The second was my fiancée. Because years ago, when House Vale still mattered, they'd arranged a marriage between Dorian and Lady Seraphine Duquesne, genius prodigy, heir to the most powerful house in the realm. And now she'd come in person to publicly, gleefully call it off. Ice cold. Perfect posture. A woman who'd rehearsed this rejection and meant to enjoy it. And then, for half a second, so fast I almost missed it, and I don't miss things, her eyes flicked up to a tower window behind her father. Checking. Afraid. The most powerful girl in the kingdom, in the safest courtyard in the realm, surrounded by her own guards, and for half a second she was terrified of a window. Huh. Noted twice. So, day 1. A father who wants me gone by sundown, a magic system that reads like a stack of cheat codes, a servant who moves like a killer, and an Ice Queen fiancée scared of her own house. Everybody here thinks today's the day the worthless blank finally gets thrown away. They have no idea they just let the wolf out of the smoothie aisle. Time to go to work. They didn't even give me a horse. Just a cart, a road out of the capital, and Wren, my quiet downcast escort, who had been assigned to make sure the disgraced blank arrived safely at the Ashen Wall. Which was a lie, obviously. Because here's what I'd already worked out. Nobody sends a trained killer to escort garbage. They send a trained killer to dispose of garbage. My safe passage to the wall was never meant to reach the wall. Somewhere on this quiet road, Wren had orders to make Dorian Vale die of something natural and forgettable. And the funny thing, whoever hired her didn't tell her why. You could see it. She wasn't cruel, just tired and professional, and carrying an order she didn't love. A soldier, not a monster. Which meant she wasn't my problem. She was my first recruit. So that night, at the fire, I made it easy for her. Closed my eyes. Let my breathing go slow and even. Gave the professional her perfect, quiet opportunity. And right on schedule, I heard her stand. His name was Corin Bell, I said, without opening my eyes. Wren froze. The forger they had you kill in the capital last spring? He had a daughter. You left food money in his coat before you did it. You didn't have to. Nobody was watching. Now, I had no idea if any of that was true. That's the trick. You don't need the facts. You need the shape. A killer who leaves food money is a killer who hates the job. And a person who hates the job has been waiting her whole life for one single someone to notice she's more than the order she was handed. So I noticed. Out loud. The knife didn't move. Who are you? She whispered. Not the boy. Never the boy. I sat up and I smiled at my brand new asset. I'm the one person in the whole world, I said, who'd rather have you alive than gone. When's the last time anybody told you that? Her hand was shaking. 16 years I'd done this in another life, turned a target's blade into my own. It never stops being the best feeling in the world. By the time the fire burned down, the assassin they'd sent to bury me had a new employer. She just didn't have the paperwork yet. One down. A kingdom to go. 2 days later, the road narrowed into forest, and forest meant the red hand toll. 5 men, 1 log across the road, and the simple business model of pay us everything or we take everything, plus you. Their leader swaggered up, all teeth and confidence, and made his pitch. And while he talked, I did my favorite thing. I counted the room. Or, well, the forest. The big one in front was the muscle, not the brains. He kept glancing back for approval to a skinny, nervous kid by the tree, who flinched every time the leader raised his voice. The kid was the real boss's son, and over his head. 2 of the bandits had farmers' hands and stolen boots. This wasn't a gang. It was scared, hungry people playing a part. Good. Scared people are easy. You don't fight them. You give them a better story. So I stood up and told them the truth, mostly. That I was a disgraced noble blank being shipped to the Ashen Wall to die. That the cart held nothing but a condemned man and a servant. And that the king's levy, the tax caravan, was 2 hours behind us on this same road, fat with silver and guarded by exactly 6 tired men. None of that last part was true. There was no caravan. But I said it the way you say a thing you have no reason to lie about. Bored, certain, already moving on. And I watched greed do to their faces what greed always does. Why rob a dead man and a maid when there's silver coming? They practically waved us through, cleared the log themselves, wished us luck, and went to go ambush a tax caravan that does not exist on a road with a real wall patrol due by noon. I didn't lift a finger. Didn't spend a coin. Wren stared at me for a full mile. You just talked, she said. That's the whole trick, I told her. Everybody's got a sigil. Nobody guards their want. And then, on the 5th day, the world just ended. The green ran out, the sky went the color of a bruise, and there it was. The Ashen Wall, a black fist of stone at the edge of the Blight, the corruption that eats land and men and spits back monsters. The place the kingdom sends everything it wants to forget. Inside was worse. Not an army, a garbage heap with walls. The disgraced, the condemned, the crippled, the blank. Men who'd been written off so completely they'd written themselves off too. Every eye that landed on me had the same dead question. Another one for the pile? And up on the high balcony, looking down on his little kingdom of the forgotten, was the man who ran this place like a private extortion racket, Commander Rodorick Cass. He looked at the new shipment of nobodies the way a spider looks at a full web. Cass saw a worthless blank, one more body to work to death or sell for parts. That's what everyone in this fort saw. A reject at the bottom of a heap at the end of the world, with no magic, no name, and no way out. What none of them saw was a man who'd just been handed a fortress full of desperate, discarded, furious people that nobody was watching, a corrupt commander with 100 tells, and a frontier so far from the capital that the rules were whatever I decided to make them. They thought they'd throw me into a grave. They'd handed me a base of operations. Classic Tuesday. Time to go to work. They didn't give me a bunk. They gave me a number. At the Ashen Wall, you stop being a person the second the gate booms shut. You're a body with a spear, and the only question anyone asks is how long before the Blight, or the Cold, or the Commander uses you up. Everybody here had given up. Perfect. People who think you're nothing will hand you everything. So for 3 days, I did the only thing I'm good at. I watched, and the wall told me its whole miserable little story without saying a word. Here's the story. Out past the wall is the Blight, and the Blight doesn't just kill you, it gets in. One scratch from one twisted thing out there, and the rot starts crawling up your arm, gray and patient. In a week, you're dead. Or worse, you're the next twisted thing they send somebody to put down. There's exactly one cure, Rue, the fort's healer, and the green sigil in her hand that can burn the rot back out. One tired old woman against a whole wall of dying men. She can save maybe 3 a day. Guess who decided he owns all 3? Commander Roderick Cass. He runs the Ashen Wall like a man squeezing a stone for water, and he found the perfect stone, a healer who can save your life, and a whole fort of men who'll give anything not to die. The price of Rue's green light isn't gold. It's everything. Your pay, your boots, your dead wife's ring, the letters your family sends. Cass takes the lot, then decides if you're worth healing. Half the time he lets a man rot anyway, just so the rest keep paying. It's beautiful, honestly. Cruel, but beautiful. And while I watched him work, I did my favorite thing. I counted his tells. A man who runs a racket has to believe 2 things: that he's the smartest one in the room, and that nobody at the bottom is worth looking at twice. Cass believed both. About me, specifically. Noted. See, everyone here treats the rot like a curse, something only the god's magic can touch. But I spent a whole other life learning that a curse is just chemistry you haven't insulted properly yet. The Blight Rod is a living thing. Living things have a pH. And I was standing in a wasteland absolutely full of quicklime, ash, and salt. So I went to work in the dark with a stolen pot and a wasteland's worth of free ingredients. Burned lime for the caustic. Rendered ash for the lie. Boiled it down with salt and a bitter root even the goats won't eat. 3 nights of failed batches that nearly took my eyebrows. Classic Tuesday. And on the 4th night, I tried it on a dying man the commander had already written off. A boy named Tam with gray creeping past his elbow and a week to live. I packed the wound with my paste. It hissed. He screamed. And by morning the rod had pulled back further than Rue's magic had ever managed. No sigil. Just a man who reads labels, finally, in this life, reading the right one. Rue found out first. I braced for her to scream witchcraft. Instead, she took my hand, the bare one, the blank one, and turned it over like it was the interesting thing in the room. 200 years, she whispered, and the gods sent a healer with no mark at all. I didn't correct her. Let the woman have her miracle. I had a business to build. Because here's the thing about a cure in a place where the only cure is owned by a monster. It's not medicine. It's currency. I could save a man for a heel of bread and a favor, and undercut the commander's whole racket without him ever seeing the coin move. Quietly. Patiently. One grateful, breathing, formerly dying man at a time. My first real hire found me. Bram, 1 eye, 1 grudge, and a reputation for breaking anything that came near him. The fort called him mad. I watched him for a day and saw something else. A soldier who'd been thrown away so many times he decided to break the world before it broke him again. That's not madness. That's an unpaid invoice. So I sat down across from him, put down bread and a jar of the cure, and told him the truth, that I knew his rot was 3 days from his heart, that I could stop it, and that in return I didn't want his coin. I wanted his word. Bram looked at me a long time. Nobody gives Bram anything, he said. I know, I told him. That's the whole problem with this place. He ate the bread. That's how you buy a mountain. Then came Pip. 14, blank like me, fast as a rumor, and treated by the whole fort like a stray dog to kick. Kids like Pip see everything and get asked about none of it. I asked. Turns out a boy nobody notices already knew every guard rotation, every smuggling hole, and exactly which officers hated the commander. I gave him a real job and the first thank you of his life. He'd have walked through the Blight for me by sundown. And that's how you build an empire out of garbage. You don't need the strong. The strong are spoken for. You take the discarded, the killer, the madman, the stray, the freak, and you give them the one thing the whole world never did. You see them. You use them well. You make them matter. By the end of my 2nd week, the commander owned the Ashen Wall. But the wall, quietly, was starting to belong to me. Naturally, it got noticed. Lieutenant Vance, polished, promoted, and proud of a storm sigil that let him throw lightning, decided the magicless freak fixing up the rabble was bad for discipline. So he did what bullies do when they're nervous. He made it public. Called me out. A formal duel, first blood, in front of the whole fort. Magic against the blank. He wanted a lesson. I wanted an audience. Everybody there did the same math. Lightning versus a skinny reject with a stick. They were already wincing for me. Cass watched from his balcony with a little smile, expecting a mess he could sweep up. And Vance raised his glowing hand and gave me, for free, the only thing I ever need. A pattern. Storm sigils are loud, fast, and gorgeous, and they have a cost nobody talks about. The lightning follows the eyes. Vance had to look where he wanted to strike, a half heartbeat before it flew, and after every bolt his hand went dark for 3 full seconds to build the next. Loud. Fast. Gorgeous. Predictable. A career's worth of tell, packed into one arrogant boy. So I let him fire first. Watched his eyes, moved before his hand, the bolt hit where I'd been. Then I simply walked into his 3 dead seconds, every time, closing the distance one dark gap at a time while the crowd stopped breathing. He panicked. Panic made him faster. Faster made the tell louder. On his 4th bolt, I was already inside it. I put his own arm behind his back, a broken shard to his throat, and leaned down to his ear so only he could hear the part that mattered. Your sigil tells me everything, Lieutenant. My hand tells you nothing. Which of us is really blind? First blood. His. And 400 forgotten men on that wall watched a nobody with no magic take apart a god's favorite. Time to go to work. That was my mistake, honestly. I wanted the fort. I got it too fast. Down in that yard, 400 men found out the commander's magic wasn't a law of nature. It was just a bigger man's bluff. And up on his balcony, Cass finally did the thing I'd been waiting 3 weeks for. He looked at me twice. He moved that night. Smashed my workshop, seized my supplies, put out word that the blank's poison was forbidden and anyone caught with it would hang. Cut me off from the fort at the knees. It was a good move. Fast, hard, public. I'd have been proud of him if he weren't about to teach my crew the exact lesson I needed them to learn. Because Cass doesn't just break things. He breaks people for the audience. He had Bran dragged into the yard and beaten bloody in front of everyone. The price, he said, of following a freak. He wanted my crew to see loyalty to me cost blood. And they saw it. They just drew the opposite lesson from the one he intended. I had 1 jar of the cure left, hidden where even I almost forgot it. I spent it all on Bram's ruined face in the dark, and while I worked, my crew watched me do the one thing Cass never would, spend everything I had on a discarded man who could give me nothing back. He beats you to make you fear him, I told them. I bleed for you so you'll never have to fear anything again. Remember which of us did which? Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. Their want had just changed owners. And then the Blight, which has terrible timing and worse manners, decided to end the argument for us. On the darkest night of the month, it came awake all at once. A surge. A tide of twisted things pouring out of the gray, more than the wall had seen in a generation. The alarm bells rang like the end of the world. Because it was, probably. Here's the dirty secret the kingdom never prints. Magic doesn't save the wall. It never has. A storm sigil is gorgeous for exactly as long as the man behind it can breathe, and there were 10,000 things in that dark and 40 tired officers on that rampart. The sigils flashed, and started, one by one, to go out. Cass screamed orders nobody could follow. The gods' favorites were losing. So the reject with no magic took the wall. While the officers burned themselves empty, I'd had 3 weeks to notice the one thing nobody uses. The Blight funnels itself through a single dry gully to reach the gate. A kill box the gods built, and nobody read. I'd been quietly making something for exactly this, the caustic cure, brewed thick and wrong, until it stopped healing and started to burn. We flooded the gully, and Pip dropped the first torch. The whole ravine went up in a white river of fire that clung and would not die, my wasteland chemistry doing what 100 storm sigils couldn't. The Blight poured into the one path to the gate, and the one path to the gate had become a furnace. No spell? No god. Just a man 3 steps ahead, and a plan, and a crew who'd walked into the dark because I asked them to. By dawn, it was over. The wall stood, for the first time in living memory, because of the men at the bottom instead of the magic at the top. 400 exiles looked at me the way you're only ever looked at once in a life. And up on his balcony, alive because of the freak he'd tried to bury, Commander Cass understood at last exactly what had walked into his fort. Good. I was tired of him underestimating me. It's so much more fun when they're afraid. He made his move before the smoke cleared. Not a blade, a letter. Sealed with a crest I recognized from a certain assassin's contract, sent hard and fast down the Capitol Road. Cass couldn't beat me in his own fort anymore. So he was calling the one power that had wanted me dead since before I ever arrived. Everybody at this wall thinks the commander just called for help. They have no idea he just invited the endgame to dinner, and I do so love a table I've already set. Time to go to work. Cass's letter got an answer faster than I expected, and the answer arrived in a black carriage that had no business surviving that road. Out stepped a soft, smiling, silver-haired man in robes worth more than the entire fort, Magister Corvain, sent from the capital to investigate the troubling reports of sedition at the Ashen Wall, which is a very long, very polite way to spell my name. And Corvain came armed with the nastiest sigil in the deck. A mine brand, violet, rare, and quietly terrifying. The man could stand in a room and read the truth off your face like a page. Every lie you told, he heard the shape of. In a tribunal that makes him judge, jury, and lie detector all at once. Cass hadn't called for a soldier. He'd called for a weapon that made the truth itself work for the house. Cass practically glowed. He walked the Magister up to his balcony, poured the good wine, and laid it all out. The freak, the forbidden alchemy, the crew, the officer I'd humiliated. A tidy little case. By nightfall it was announced. A tribunal at dawn to try to blank Dorian Vale for sedition, unlawful sorcery, and inciting the garrison. Sentence, if convicted, death. They thought they were building a gallows. They were building me a stage. So at dawn, they put me in the middle of a cold stone hall, alone, the way you stage a thing that's already decided. Corvain up high with his violet sigil lit and ready. Cass at his shoulder, wearing the smile of a man watching a debt get collected. And the whole fort packed in at the back to watch the reject finally get what rejects get. Corvain opened the way that always worked. He lit his mind sigil, aimed it at me, and asked my name, expecting to feel the truth of me bloom open like everyone else's. And he felt nothing. A blank wall. No thoughts to read, no lie to catch, no mind to touch at all. I watched the confidence drain out of that elegant face and something colder pour in behind it. Because a mind sigil can read any man in the world. Except one it can't see. And there it was, a secret even I hadn't finished understanding. A blank isn't just a man with no magic. A blank is a hole in the magic. No sigil can read me, fool me, ward against me, or find me. To every spell in this kingdom, I simply do not exist. Corvain had come to weigh my soul on the God's own scale. And the scale read empty. For the first time in that hall, the most powerful man in it was afraid, and only he and I knew why. You can't read me, Magister, I said, nice and quiet so the whole room leaned in to hear it. So this stops being a tribunal, and starts being what I'm actually good at. A negotiation, Cass told me to shut my mouth. I didn't. I'd waited 3 weeks for a room this full, with a scale this loud, and every seed I'd planted was about to come up at once. Seed 1. While Cass had been busy building my gallows, Pip, the stray nobody watches, had been busy in the commander's own strong room. He walked to the front of that hall and put a ledger in my hands. Cass's ledger. Every coin he'd extorted, every ring he'd taken off a dying man, every soldier he'd let rot for profit, written in the commander's own tidy hand. Funny thing about treating a boy like furniture. Furniture goes anywhere. So I read it out. Names they knew. Prices they paid in blood and boots and dead men's rings. I read the fort its own stolen life, out loud in front of the capital's own judge, and I watched 400 men do the arithmetic of every friend Cass had let die for a coin. Corvain wanted a clean sedition trial. What he got was a confession, and it wasn't mine. Seed 2. Corvain called my cure unlawful sorcery, so I let the evidence speak for itself, Rue, and every man in that hall whose rod I burned back with nothing but ash and lime and attention. They stepped forward one at a time and rolled up their sleeves, and the sorcery turned out to be 400 living men the commander had left to die. Try sentencing that. The whole room had quietly changed sides, and it changed sides standing up. And seed 3 was just for the Magister. I leaned in and spent the thing I'd been saving. You didn't ride 5 days for a fort commander's paperwork, I said, low. Somebody in the capital paid to have me dead on the road before I ever got here. The same crest that sealed my escort's contract seals your carriage. So let's both admit what this is. You didn't come to try a blank. You came to make sure the last one stays buried. Corvain went very, very still. I'd stopped guessing 3 sentences ago. Now I was just reading his face, the one part of this that God's own liar couldn't hide. And here's the seed I hadn't planted, the one that grew on its own. Wren went rigid when Corvain's robes caught the light. She knew that crest. She'd worn its orders. Because my quiet, deadly Wren was never just some hired knife. She was a royal silencer, the crown's own, trained in the capital to end people who knew too much, cast out for the one order she'd refused to carry. And the man who'd signed that unforgivable order was sitting on the dais pretending to be a judge. I know you, Magister, Wren said, and her voice cut the room in half. I know what you send people to do in the dark, and I know whose seal you carry. Not a house's. Not even the crown's. She looked at me then, and said the part that rearranged the whole board. They didn't send me to kill a disgraced boy. They sent me to kill a blank? The order came from the tower above the throne. And I've spent a year wondering why the most powerful place in the world is so afraid of a man with an empty hand. Now that was the real question. And Corvain's face had just answered half of it. The tribunal broke apart into a thing Corvain couldn't control, and I let Cass stew in his own ledger while I stepped out to the wall, because a second problem had flown in on Black Wings that morning. A message. From Seraphine. My Ice Queen ex-fiancée, reaching across the whole kingdom to the one man in it her family's magic couldn't watch her right to. Remember the tower window she flinched at, back in that courtyard on day one? Now I knew what was in it. A little girl. Her sister, Elise. House Duquesne doesn't own Seraphine because of her rare high sigil. They own her through the child they keep locked in that tower. Every cold thing she ever did, she did on a leash with a hostage on the end of it. The most powerful girl in the kingdom, and she'd never once been free. And she was writing to me because a blank is the only messenger no sigil can intercept. No mind can read, no ward can stop. I'm not just a man they can't kill. I'm a man they can't watch. Her family holds a child in a tower, I told my crew, guarded by the best magic money can buy. Wards, mind readers, the lot. Bram grunted that it sounded impossible. I smiled. For anyone the wards can see, sure. Good thing I've got the one asset in the world that walks through a magic lock like it isn't there. I sent the raven back with 3 words. I see you. An alliance with the most powerful house's most dangerous weapon, forged in the one blind spot the gods left in their own system. The slow burn had just found its first spark. Then, I went back inside to collect. Corvain came to erase one quiet blank on a distant wall. Instead, he was standing in a hall where 400 armed men had just learned their commanders sold their lives for coin. And where the capital's own judge would have to write down, officially, exactly how corrupt this fort had become. I gave the Magister his only clean exit, and I made him pay for it. The deal was simple, and I let him think he'd thought of it. Cass takes the fall, the racket, the death, all of it, true and documented, sentence under the Magister's own seal. The capital gets to look clean. Corvain gets to go home alive. And the Ashen Wall gets a new quiet arrangement about who actually keeps it standing. They dragged Koss down from his balcony in his own men's hands, screaming that I was nothing. A blank. A reject. Yeah. I'm the reject who owns your wall now, Commander. Noted. Corvain stopped at the gate before he left. No threats. He was past those. He just looked at me the way you look at a thing you've been taught your whole life to fear, and said, quietly, you have no idea what you are, do you? And for once, honestly, he had me. I didn't. Not yet. But I've never in 2 lifetimes let a man leave a room believing he knew something I didn't. So I smiled and let him carry that itch all the way back to the capital. Everybody thinks I just won a fort. They have no idea I just mailed my own warning straight to the top. So that's the story of how the kingdom threw away its trash and accidentally handed a dead operative a fortress, an army of the forgotten, a chemistry set the gods can't counter, and a leash on its most powerful house. Not bad for a man who started this life face down in the dirt next to a peanut. The Ashen Wall wasn't a grave anymore. It was a capital of its own, mine, and it was only the beginning. But 5 days right away, in the shining city I'd never seen, my little victory was landing on a very old desk. Because Corvain's report was already flying home, and it was going to a room I didn't know existed yet. The highest tower in the kingdom. The one above the throne. The one Wren's order came from. Up there, above the king, above the houses, a keeper of very old secrets read the words the blank cannot be read and went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the night. Because 200 years ago, there was another empty hand. And the last time a blank walked this kingdom, he came within a breath of tearing the gods' whole sigil system down to the root, before they made very, very sure the world would never see one again. And now a report from a forgotten frontier fort was telling that room the one thing it had spent 2 centuries making certain could never be true again. Another one was alive. Awake. And already winning. The figure in the highest tower set down the page, looked out toward the wall at the end of the world, and began, at last, to be afraid of me. Good. Let them be afraid up there in their tower. They spent 200 years hunting men like me because they know exactly what one of us can do to a world built on rules. They just made one mistake the last time, and they're about to make it again. They think the danger is that I have no power. They have no idea the danger is that I finally figured out what I am. Season 1's over. I'm just getting started. Time to go to work.